States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to our first budget meeting of 2025. I would like to introduce the budget chair, Mrs. Cornelillo, right here.
There you go.
I'm new, so be patient. Yeah, please do. And Mrs. Cornelillo, will you add anything, Mrs.
No, I look forward to hearing. I know they put a lot of time and energy and effort into this budget, and I have no doubt that it will be one that we can all fully support and do great things for our students, which is why we're here. So, Ms. Fields, would you like to begin?
Yes, I would. Thank you very much. Well, welcome everyone to the 25-26 budget. As Mrs. Nardolillo just said, we'll get started. Tonight is an overview for everyone to think about what it is we're trying to accomplish and what we know right now about our fiscal reality thanks to the governor's budget. I want to start by saying thank you to the team who helped to work on this budget, many of whom are in this room. Mrs. Howard is not in this room tonight. She is unable to be here, unfortunately. So you have me for the entire presentation tonight. So it won't be split. It will be, I will be doing the bulk of the work for tonight for the presentation part only. For those who are watching at home, if you have any questions, our communications team is here. Their contact email is up on the screen. If you should have a question throughout the night, please feel free to send them an email and they will watch that in real time. And when we ask for questions later, after the board has a chance to ask questions, we will see if we have any questions from our community. And thanks to all of you who are watching at home. So tonight we're going to talk about our goals, our measures of student success, basically what it is we stand for here as the District of North Colony. We're going to talk about New York Inspires. That was formerly known as the Blue Ribbon Commission. The changing graduation requirements, they've rebranded themselves to New York Inspires. So that is what that is. We'll look at what our building enrollment looks like. Obviously our enrollment has been growing over the years. And then we'll look at our New York State aid and our tax cap and where we are. Okay, so if we go to our goals and our measures of student success, our mission never changes, right? We know what our mission is. It is that we're providing all of our students the opportunities and the support that they need so that they can engage in relevant and challenging work, which contributes to their academic and social growth and development. We've always cared about the whole child. We want to make sure we're tending to all their needs, and that we also aim to work with all of our staff, our teachers, our administrators, that we're constantly working together to build our capacity so that we can provide the best education possible. The mission never changes. It's our North Star. What changes is the context of the times. So there was a time when our work looked different because we were educating during a pandemic. The context matters. So we'll talk about the context, and right now we're going to talk about the changes that are coming with New York State, the first big change to graduation requirements in quite a long time. So we're thinking about our mission and also what is our charge? You know, what's in our hearts, our minds, our hearts, and what we do every day. And I believe as a district, as a teaching faculty, as an admin team, as this Board of Education, that we are future focused. We are always thinking about what's the next great thing we can do? What's the next great opportunity that we can provide for our students? That we work as a team to really think together, how do we support one another so that we can best support our students? And that we're constantly thinking about that continuous growth and development. We're a very strong district. I'm very proud of us. I'm very proud of the work that we do, but we can't stand still. If you stand still, then you're really not moving at all. You're probably going backward. So that work is really our charge, and that when we really think about what we do, that we strive to lead with purpose and joy and love and respect. We are so fortunate to do this work. It is noble work that we do in helping kids to become the best versions of themselves possible and helping families, and that's really what everything we do is rooted in. So let's talk a little bit about New York Inspires, because it's actually quite inspirational. I'm actually really pleased that they chose this tagline. And I'd like to think about it, if we are to take our cue from New York, as we move forward, what would it take not just to educate every child, not just to make sure every child graduates and crosses the stage and gets a diploma, but what does it take to inspire every child in this district? How do we do that for each and every child? And so New York State is looking at it. There's 4 big transformations that they're looking at over the next few years. The first is that there is a New York State Portrait of a Graduate. We're going to talk about that tonight. That they're going to redefine credits and learning experiences. Right now, everything that we do is dictated by New York State, and they're looking at that differently. They're also going to change some diploma assessment requirements. That's the Regents exams that we're used to. And they're going to move to one high school diploma that will have multiple different endorsements that can show the different kinds of things kids did throughout their time in high school. For the purposes of tonight, we're just going to look at the first 2. So this is the New York State Department of Education Portrait of a Graduate. So this is New York State Education saying, when a student graduates from a high school in New York State, this is what we hope they will be able to do. We hope that they will be able to be a critical thinker, an innovative problem solver. We hope that they will be literate across multiple content areas, that they will have cultural competence, that they will have social emotional competence, they will be an effective communicator, they will be a global citizen. These are all goals that New York State is putting forward. Now, when you think about that, the interesting piece is, okay, if you want all students to have these skills, how will those skills be measured? How will I know if you are actually an innovative problem solver? Will it be through a Regents exam? It might not be. So these are the kinds of conversations that New York State is having and letting us start to think about what would that look like in North Colony. Now this is rolling out over a period of 5 years. So next year they will start giving us some materials, some professional development, but I never want to wait for them. I want us to think about, well, what does that mean in North Colony? And do we already have those opportunities for our students? And in many cases, I think we have a lot of these opportunities. Whoops, wrong way. But here's the interesting piece. They talk about expanding the learning experiences. And again, these are high school graduation requirements. So we're talking about our high school age students. Because they're thinking about, how are we going to know if kids can do all these things? It's probably not always going to be something we can measure on a pen and paper test. So if you look, some of these sound very familiar to us. If I look, by taking high school courses, check, we know how to do that. By passing approved assessments, check, we know how to do that. By participation in the arts, check, we certainly know how to do that. Some early college, high school experiences where kids are earning college credits, check, we know how to do that. Some capstone learning experiences. We have capstone engineering. Many of you have come and seen some of their presentations before. But what does it mean if there were a capstone kind of project in multiple subject areas? How could you show your competency as a writer with a capstone project? How could you show your understanding of U.S. history with a capstone project? Maybe it's through the production of a documentary. Maybe it's not just through the U.S. history regions. Those are the kinds of questions that New York State is asking us to think about. Approved work-based or service-based learning experiences. Okay, if you're going to show some of these skills by offering community service or work, then what does the high school day have to look like in order to allow you to do those things? These are big questions that New York State is wrestling with. Earning New York State credentials or seals. That's what I was mentioning earlier on the diploma, that there will be multiple ways that you can earn seals of accreditation for doing certain things. And so we want to think about how can we provide for that in a district such as ours. New York State approved CTE programs, we have plenty of those. So some of these we already have in place, others we'll need to explore. I keep going the wrong way. In such, there are many different ways that they can demonstrate student proficiency. So for example, the state gives us this one. One of the items on the portrait of the graduate is that you are an effective communicator. How do they measure that right now? Through the English Regents. If you pass the English Regents, then the assumption is you can read, you can write, you're an effective communicator. What the state is saying is like, wait, there's a whole bunch of different ways. You could earn the seal of biliteracy, that you are proficient in multiple languages. You could successfully complete a locally developed capstone project. What might that look like? Maybe that's that documentary you make. Maybe it's a multimedia presentation. But notice this is very different than take the Regents exam. You could successfully complete an English composition course. So maybe we're gonna say, hey, you're doing this college comp course, you're getting college credit while you're in high school, that's gonna count that you're a successful communicator. These are all decisions that will have to get made locally in the coming years. You successfully completed digital media communications, a CTE program. There's lots of communication, not just an English class, right? So there will be lots of decisions to be made across the state and in the future. It could be that you pass the state exam in English language arts. That certainly tells you that you can communicate. But we don't want to rely on just that one way. That's what the state is saying. There have to be multiple means for students to show you that taps into their interests. But look at this one. Completed a summer internship for a community newspaper. Now that would be a very different way, but one could argue that would be an incredible experience. You would have to work very hard. So the state is really asking us to start thinking about what would this look like. And I will tell you, I find it very intriguing, but I will also say we have over 2,000 kids in a high school. So how do you scale this up? If we had a high school of 50, I would say let's roll up our sleeves, we can do this tomorrow. But in a high school of 2,000, what will that look like? So this is some of the interesting work and a big change coming from state ed that hasn't really been here for a while. So I want to show you some of the things I've been thinking about in terms of where we go back to. So let's go back to this charge. So committed to being student-centered, committed to being future-focused, thinking about collaboration, encouraging genuine involvement. A lot in our charge sounds a lot like what New York State is looking for. Authentic learning experiences for students, where they can find their passions, where they can find their joy, where they find their field where they can make a difference. So I think as we think of our charge, there are some things we're already doing outside of obviously the arts, CTE, some of the things the state said. And I've been thinking a lot about this because the question is, when it's for every student, how do we level up? So I think it's a good time for us to ask ourselves as a board of education, as a leadership team, as a school community, a really important, essential question. It's something that I've been asking for a while. It made its way into one of our calendars. It's something that's very fundamental to what I believe education should be. And I've said it so many times. It is not enough for them just to get a diploma and then cross the stage and not know what they can offer or not know where they're going to go. Not everybody has to have it figured out, but I really think the purpose of a great public education is to help students find their passion and have an opportunity to pursue it, but give them the knowledge, the skills, and the opportunities so that they can follow their passion. If your passion is video gaming, but the only thing you know how to do is play video games, well, how do we scale that up to turn it into something that you can do that could become your career path? What does that look like? If you're a person who's really great at helping people, but you don't necessarily want to be a doctor, what are the million other jobs related to healthcare that you could do? Lean into that side of yourself that really wants to help other people. And how do we give kids a taste of those experiences while they're in high school so that they know what the possibilities are? Because they all have unique talents, they all have gifts, and part of our role should be helping them to figure out what that is. And I will tell you, as kids get older, and this is where I compliment New York State, and I jotted this down for myself because I was thinking about this, is, we have, as kids get older, it is common for them to choose courses, to choose activities, extracurricular activities, because they think somewhere in the future it will look good. This might look good to a college application. This might look good to a prospective employer. That's all fine, but sometimes in choosing what they think will look good in the future, they're missing an opportunity to find their thing that they're actually passionate about. And then we also have kids who come through and they just don't know what they're passionate about. It may not be. For me, it was great because it was reading and writing, and school was all about reading and writing. So that made it very easy to work for me. But if I weren't there, And it didn't look like it wasn't gonna be music, unfortunately for me. I wasn't that artistic. If I didn't have that, I don't know if I would have found my way. So where are the kids out there, the state is trying to say, where they're not finding their way? And how do we, as a really robust, good school system, start thinking about how do we improve those outcomes for each and every child? And that's where I'm really excited by what the state is doing here. So we've talked in the past, I know I brought him up to you before, back when I was assistant superintendent or deputy, about Sir Kenneth Robinson, who unfortunately has passed away, but he has studied education, he has studied creativity, and he talks about this idea of being in your element. And if we all think about that, we've all heard that phrase, what it means to be in your element. He defines it as when your aptitude and your passion are in the same place. And he said, when people are in their element, they connect with something fundamental to their sense of identity, purpose, and well-being. When you find your thing. I was lucky, like I knew it was teaching. It was my thing, I found it early, and I loved it my whole life. But not all kids find that right away. But that is such a powerful, powerful question about how do we help the kid find their element? Because we all know when you're really invested in something, you're gonna work really hard on it. You know, it's very easy to give up on something that you're not that interested in, that you don't really see why you have to do it. But when you're really interested, you'll go back and you'll try it, and you'll try it again, and you'll try it again until you get it right. How do we bring that into schools? Oh, this thing, I keep going the wrong way, sorry. So we do some of this, right? If you have come on the evenings to our science research program, here are just 2 examples from last year. You see students who are doing work that you cannot believe they're still in high school. They're curing cancer, they're figuring out how to clean our water, they're figuring out how to get plastics out of the atmosphere. Usually past the introduction, I'm not even sure, because they're at such a high level. Those are kids who I think are in their element. They found their thing, it makes sense to them, and they're willing to work really hard. That is fantastic. I will tell you, in our high school, we had 18 students in 10th grade in the program, 15 in 11th, and 7 in 12th grade. We have a total of 40 students. My question is, are there more students who might benefit from this program? Like, how do we scale up? How do we say to kids, okay, you may not be the super scientist, but boy, would you benefit from doing some research in the field, getting connected with a mentor who works in that field, and giving you that opportunity. That's where I think we've got the seeds to grow into what the state wants us to do when we think about these different pathways, and it's exciting. Our civic engagement class, this is some pictures from last year looking at sustainable waste management at the high school. These are kids who are going for that endorsement on their diploma, thinking about how can they contribute to making our society better, how can they solve real world problems. This year we have 15 students. Now, at the board meeting every month, you see a different student from this age through high school age who's making a difference in their world. So how do we scale this up? Because there's way more than 15 kids at Shaker High School who are concerned about their community and making it a better place. So how do we say, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be a standalone course that you can't fit in your schedule. That's what the state's asking us to do. That's really exciting work. Capstone Engineering, this is a great picture. So you heard the phrase capstone. Right now we have 37 students in our Principles of Engineering class. That's the feeder to the capstone where they actually do their presentations. They work with mentors in the field. We have 13 students who are in capstone. I'll tell you what, when we do our surveys, the number 1 major that is declared by our students going off to college is engineering. So how are more of those kids not going into these engineering classes when they're available in high school? I'm going to tell you right now, it's schedule complex. They can only get so much in a day. And so you think this might look better or that might look better, and you miss the thing that is your passion when you're in high school. We have our Shaker Writing Center. We've had this for a while now. These are students who are passionate about English, and they take a course and then they learn to become writing consultants. So they're learning how to help other students write well. There was recently a regional conference where there were students from all kinds of local colleges, community colleges, four-year colleges, where writing consultants came together. Our Shaker High School kids went. I believe I'm right, Pam, we were the only high school kids there. Our kids were with all college kids because we have this program. Now, right now, we only have 7 kids in the program. Why is that? Again, probably schedule conflict or thinking, what does this look like? And so when you go back to that question about, are you taking courses because you think it's going to mean something, or are you following what matters to you and where you could make a difference that makes sense to you, that's the question that we're going to wrestle with. Now, here's something that I want us to think about. All of those classes that you saw are classes students choose to take. They have an interest, they have some aptitude, and they choose to take it. We, over the last few years, last year being new for freshman seminar, we did something different with freshman seminar. Every single freshman is in freshman seminar. So it's not just the 12 kids who can take a class. It is every student. This is Amber Kosh, you know, she is our community garden director out there with the kids, working on a project at the beginning of the year. Every single student who goes to Shaker High School goes through that freshman seminar. We figured out a way to do that. So that's when I say scale up, we can scale up, but we've got to think big. And that's why it's a part of the budget conversation. It's not for next year's budget, but it is something that's on our horizon. And I think the state has given us such pure opportunity here to think about education for the kids' future, that we want to think about ways where it doesn't just serve a certain segment of our community, it's open to all students in our community. Another one is with our innovation labs. So these are our these are our 6th grade students in the coding and robotics lab. These are our elementary students who are working with SUNY Codal Skill. And is it trout, Ashley? Yep. They have trout, and they're watching them grow. They're going to be releasing them through a combination with SUNY Codal Skill. They're 5th graders. All the 5th graders are doing that kind of work in Forts Ferry. The innovation labs, that's just one of our 6 innovation labs. The whole goal of the innovation lab is when you're in 6th grade and you're young and you're new in the middle school, and it's the first time, right? You get some electives. You don't really have that many electives in elementary school. You don't know what you're good at. You don't know what you might have interest in. So by giving you 6 weeks and 6 different labs, you get to explore a whole bunch of things that might pique your curiosity. I say this is the kind of work that we should be so proud of, and grateful to the board for supporting this kind of work, because again, this isn't just for the kids whose families can afford it over the summer, who can afford it after school. This is for all our kids. And that's when we think about leveling the playing field and opportunity, that's really exciting. So as we go forward, the single biggest change coming down the pike right now, as I look at it on the educational landscape, is the change to graduation requirements. And it's a really positive and exciting change. It's going to take work, and it's going to take thinking about what it could look like in decision making, and more guidance from the state needs to be forthcoming. But as we think about the kinds of things we've started to offer, I think we have really good groundwork here. So kind of where we've been and where we're going, I think it's a really exciting time. I'm going to move to enrollment next, unless anybody wants to ask a question from the board on this section.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the New York State Education Department has a program called Access VR that starts at age 14. And when students go through the Access VR program, it does and overlaps with much of your presentation. Has the state talked about how that's integrating with the school district plan? Because it seems like that program and this program have the same exact mission. Mm-hmm. And that program is a little different because it goes beyond the school. So it starts at age 14 and it goes through the person's entire life, right? And right now that's towards people who have vocational rehabilitation necessarily needs. But they're like whole service and like how they do it, like it totally overlaps what you said. So has there been any discussion on resources from that program, connections to that program, how it intersects?
If it's happening at the state level, we don't know about it yet. So the state has just put in a communications team for this work and getting resources out to the field. So if it's happened, it hasn't been discussed in the circles that come down to us yet. But you are right, it's a very similar thing. It's just for a specialized population, where here the state is thinking more broadly, and it would make sense, but sometimes they get in their own silos as well. So that's a really good point, really good point. So no big changes. There's not going to be a point, 3 weeks from now in the budget, we're going to say, and we need a this because of the Blue Ribbon Commission, but just a time when we're thinking about the context in which we're developing a budget. This is the big change that will be coming, that we'll be working through in the next couple of years. Okay, so that was the 10,000 foot. Now we're going to get into some brass tacks about where are we in terms of our building enrollment. And so we've done building enrollment differently over the years. So last year I did the projections for you, and you might remember how the projections work. So with the projections, the goal is that I look at our report from our demographer, Dr. McGibbon, and I look at our current numbers. So for example, I'm going to take kindergarten away because obviously we don't have a feeder for kindergarten. Let's start in grade 1. So this is 23-24. We had 395 students in grade 1. If we roll it over and say no new kids come in, no other kids go out, and I just purely rolled it over, I would say 395 kids next year. Now they'll be second graders. We know that's not realistic. Kids are going to come in, kids are going to leave. 446 in second grade becomes 446 third graders. That's not a projection. That's just a rollover. So what I started to do was I started to look at McGibbon and what his projections were. So if you were to look, in 23-24, he projected that we were going to have 409 first graders. In fact, I know our number was 395 at the time. He projected we were going to have 409, and then when they moved up to second grade, he projected that class of 409 would swell to a class of 420. In other words, there would be 11 more students added. So in order to get my projection, I thought, well, why use his estimate here? Why don't I use the number of kids who are sitting in front of us? So if I know there's 395 first graders and my growth factor is 11, I'm going to add that 11 to 395 and then make a projection that our total number of second graders would be 406. So I did that for each of the grades, came up with a growth factor, added it to the current enrollment that we had at the time, and I do that usually in January. So I made these projections in January, and going back and looking at where we ended up, the system's not bad. I'm not a demographer, I don't pretend to play one, but when we look, we were off by 2 in first grade, 4 in second grade, 3 in third grade, 2 in fourth grade, and we had a bigger change of 16 in fifth grade. But overall, not a bad methodology. Did the same for 6 through 12. We were off by 9 in 6th grade, 4 in 7th grade, 1 in 8th grade, 25 in 9th grade. 9th grade is always tricky because obviously we get kids from private schools. It's always a little bit hard to project. We were off by 1 in 10th grade, 5 in 11th, and 3 in 12th grade. So those are all pretty much within 10, which I did in January, and this is where they ended up in June of that following school year. Not January to June, but June a whole year later. So those gave me enough confidence to say, let's do it again. Let's do the same thing. So now, move ahead. Here's where we are in the 24-25 year. Same exact system. Here's how many kids are sitting in our classrooms right now. I think I took these numbers in early February, I'm going to say. And then here's McGibbon. Here's what the rollover growth factor is. And here are our projections. Interestingly enough, we don't obviously have a feeder. He's projecting 391 for kindergarten, but if we go back to last year, he was projecting that we would have 389 and we only had 364. And from all our data that we have from information services, that kindergarten number is high. And he will be the first one to tell you that as soon as interest rates go over 5%, all bets are off. Because although it feels like a lot of our growth in our community is related to new construction, a lot of it was housing turnover. But as mortgage rates went up, and everything got more expensive, people are staying in their homes longer and they're not turning over as much. So I suspect that next year, based on everything we have because of our numbers from UPK and all the data we have, that number's probably going to be close to the 360 again. That's why there's the asterisk on the 391. I just think that's too high. So when we go through it, I projected all the numbers for 1st through 12th grade, and here's where it lands. The projection for our elementaries is 2544. It's currently 2548. So that is pretty much equal. The middle school is going from 1493 to 1491, pretty much equal. The growth that we're seeing is in the high school, and that's that bubble still going through that we've been tracking for years. They're now high school age. We've been looking at it that long. So that high school is going from 2140 to 2188. Overall, as a district, going from 6181 to about 6223. So this is at a district level very much in line with the demographer's projections. He said we were going to have a steep increase and then we were going to start to level off. So there were years where we were adding over 100 students at a clip, as you'll remember. We're starting to level off, and we're seeing that even in this year. So overall, what does that mean in terms of staffing? That means we don't need a lot of extra staff as we have in previous years, because we're not adding the sheer number of kids that we have previously. So as we think about that and the budget development, and this would be the part where I would turn it over to Mrs. Howard, we as a district, I'm very proud that we're always student-centered in our budget. We're always mission-focused and student-centered, trying to think about how do we invest our resources to ensure the success and well-being of every student. And I know that's the commitment of this board. I know it's the commitment of this administrative team. So as we go through the month of March and we think about the budget development, that's always our North Star. How do we ensure the success, the well-being of every student, and give them an education that's not just good, but will prepare them for the next stages of their lives? And we believe we're in that position. So Governor Hochul, her executive budget proposal came out. I think everyone was a little bit surprised because remember last year there were a lot of potential cuts to school districts and aid and the whole harmless situation that arose last year. She came out with a very generous budget in terms of state aid. An $8.6 billion increase across all the school districts in the state. That is 3.6%. Usually we get the governor's numbers and then we wait for the legislator to weigh in because then the numbers go up. I don't know that they're going to go up that much because she started from a really high point. There are, however, in the state, she was clear that there are some budget gaps projected for 2027 and 2028 that she has to be mindful of, we have to be mindful of. The foundation aid, which is the biggest sum of aid that we get, is going to increase for the state by about $1.46 billion or 5.9%. There are due minimum increases to all school districts. We were not a school district that was going to get a cut in aid last year because of our growth in enrollment, but you remember hearing on the news there were many districts that were. That is going away for this year. There is no reduction to any of the expense-based aid categories. So all in all, let's just say it's a very positive budget proposal coming out of the governor. And she's proposing a full expansion of the Universal School Meals Program. Obviously, we've already qualified, but that is something that we have to re-qualify for every 3 years. So we would have to reapply at the federal level next year. So there is a possibility, if this doesn't come through, that we may not the next time qualify and will no longer be able to offer the free meals. So that is in the budget. We'll see if it makes it to the final cut of the budget, of course. And incentives for supplying meal programs with food from New York farmers and growers. So really trying to source our food locally. As you well know, we're sourcing it very locally. So this year, when we think about the tax cap, it's either inflation or 2%. Inflation this year is 2.9. The 2% will be our allowable growth factor because it's the lesser of the two. So it seems to always go that way. So 2% is our allowable growth factor. There has been a change in the foundation aid formula, and this actually will help North Colony. So a couple of things to point out about the changes. First of all, one of the things that's not on here that I really do want to credit the Rockefeller group for is one of their first recommendations was that state aid needs to be predictable. And while that sounds like, yeah, of course, you know where we stand. Every January, we wait for the governor's proposal like this because we really can't go too far with our budget because we know we only have taxes or state aid, and we have to wait for what that state aid is. And when there are wild swings, it's very hard to come up with a multi-year strategy because we don't have a variable over here that we can depend on. So I always make the analogy of if you think about your own family budgets, you know, you're humming along and then you realize like, oh, in the next 5 years, I've got some kids who are gonna go to college. So you know that's coming, so you start planning differently to be ready for when the kids are gonna go to college. Or, oh, you know, I need to buy a car in a couple of years. I'm gonna have to think about that. You plan for it, so you know if you have something big coming up. So for us, you know, we have a transition to zero emission buses coming up. That's a big thing. That's like sending your kids to college on your local budget, right? So not knowing what state aid is going to look like year to year makes it very hard to make a multi-year plan. Most of us do that in our home budgets. So that, to me, was one of the great things about their recommendation. A couple of other things. They updated the poverty census levels. This is probably one of those things that went under the radar when the governor came up with this panel. As of last school year, last year's budget, for the building of the budget, all of the information was based on the census from the year 2000. So they were looking at a profile of North Colony from the year 2000. So think about how much our district has changed in the last 25 years. So one of the major things of the Rockefeller Foundation was to say, you've got to use more up-to-date data. Like if I had a kid turn in a research paper and every source was 25 years old, I would say to them like, do you have some more current data? So that is one of the biggest changes they made. That actually helps us. So they reduced the free and reduced price lunch, which was one of the things that they used, to a 3-year average of economically disadvantaged families from more recent census data. That's really important because we know free and reduced lunches, not everybody applies, and to not take a 1 year, but to take a 3-year average gives us a better snapshot of who the kids are and who the families are in front of us. And then instead of using the 2000 census, they moved to a federal measure which is called SAPE, and it stands for, I always have to look at it, Small Area Income and Poverty Estimates. And what it is it comes out at the federal level. They look at multiple measures. You can go on, they have a whole interactive thing. You can look by state, you can look by county, you can look by school district. For our school district, it looks at the number of children from the ages of 5 to 17 who live in a family who is at the poverty line. So this is a much more realistic number for us than the census from 2000. Both of those factors that got changed with the Rockefeller Institute study, both of those have increased the aid that North Colony will get because it more appropriately reflects our families. And if you were wondering, because I did just look it up, the federal poverty rate is a family of 4, $32,150 a year for a family of 4. So looking at that, we're going to get a little bit more aid. And we are also looking right now at the capital project and the construction to see if we should do any interest payments in advance. So that may affect the tax cap. So we'll talk to you more about that as we go on, because that could influence the tax cap calculation. As we think about what is it we have to consider in terms of the cost, the expenditures as a district. So first we have retirement costs. So teachers' retirement is TRS, ERS is employee retirement system that we have to pay into. Our teacher retirement rate is actually decreasing from 10.11% to 9.5%. That's a good thing. That means our share is a little bit less. Our ERS rate is actually increasing, going from 15.2 to 16.5. We obviously have more in the teacher retirement, so that is one of the things we have to look at. That's also calculated yearly. It's based on how the stock market is performing, so that can be very volatile, obviously, and sort of their portfolio of investments. Health insurance and benefit costs, I think we all know this, health insurance is going through the roof everywhere. So our increases are anywhere from 8 to 12.5% depending on which plan people are in. So those will always be costs that we have to think about when we're figuring our budget. And what those increased costs will be. Contractual raises, even if you just roll everybody over, there are raises that they have every year. Teachers work on step, they have a guaranteed increase. So we always think about what is the rollover cost if we did nothing but just rolled it over. That's in the millions of dollars. Retirement costs and health insurance, as I said. And then always fuel, energy costs, those are going up. Student services and any debt service that we may take on. So, budget state aid projections. I'm going to be very clear about this. I have presented to the administrators. This is a good budget year. This is a good budget year in terms of foundation aid for North Colony. It is, however, a one-year snapshot, and it's always, I think, incumbent upon us to think about, even though I don't know what the state aid will look like in the future, we've had many things. We've had the Maplewood annexation aid that took us through quite a bit. We had COVID relief monies. Those things are gone, right? So we really only have our state aid to look at. So as we're thinking forward, say 3-4 years out, we'll have debt that's going to come on from the capital project that was voted on last year, and we have the transition to zero emission buses. So just because this year is good, we have to be mindful of sustainability. Where will we be 3 years from now? So just like you would do in your own family, you've got to save, you've got to be mindful of what your future expenses will be. So on top of all the annual expenses that happen every year, we also have capital project expenses coming on, and we'll have the zero emission conversion coming on. So for our aid for this year, you can see in orange is the foundation aid. That's always the biggest amount of aid we get. It is going up by $2.9 million, 2.99, almost $3 million. If Sybil were here, she would remind you that the state draws our enrollment numbers twice. This is from the first draw of enrollment numbers. The projections were a little bit high. That's probably going to come down a little bit. Not a significant amount, but when it all comes out in the wash in the governor's final budget, don't be surprised if that's down slightly. Our transportation aid is up about $500,000. Our BOCES aid, this looks like it's down by $567,000. That's because there's still almost half a school year left. So we buy through June 30th. So by the time the end of the year comes and we buy everything that we buy from BOCES, that'll level out. It's just as of right now, or as of when they drew these numbers in January, that looks lower than what it will be. So that actually probably won't come up in red at all. Our high cost aid is going down a bit, and our building aid is going down a bit at this point because we paid off debt last year and we haven't incurred the new debt. So it looks bad because the aid's going down, but the good side is it's because we paid off debt. Overall, where do we land? We land up about $2.4 million, $2.5 million. That's really a good, generous amount of state aid. But I will say, and so we'll talk more about this, just a rollover budget will eat up almost all of that. And that's the hard thing. So you look at it and you think, oh, that's great, 2.4 million, bring on all the new programs. But when we roll over salaries, benefits, pension costs, insurance costs, all those pieces, it almost takes all of that just to do a rollover budget. And that's just the math of the world we're in right now. So everybody's favorite, right? We know the tax levy limit, the calculation. So you know we start with our prior year tax levy, so that's how much we collected last year in taxes. Our tax-based growth factor, that comes from the town assessor. He makes an assessment as to how much the town is growing. It is still growing. This is one of the things that has helped us a lot. Other regional in upstate New York don't have a growth factor. So we're lucky to have that. So we have a growth factor. We have, so we multiply those two. We add in our prior year pilot payments. Those are payments in lieu of taxes. So that's an agreement that somebody has that's been incentivized by either the town or the county to bring business or housing into this area. So we get that instead of taxes, but we still took it in as revenue, so we add it in. We take out any capital exclusions that we made last year because we've already paid on that. That gets us to $95,759,008. Then we times that by the growth factor. Remember, it's 2% this year because it's 2%. It's not the inflation rate. It's the lower of the two, and that gets us to 97,674 in the middle of the page. And then we have to take off the receivable pilot payments that we received in the prior year. We don't have carryover. There's not an ERS or TRS exclusion this year. Current year capital exclusion, that's the point where I want to spend a little time. You can see in the column on the left that says 578,000. You can see in the column on the right that says 2.178 million. It's a big difference. And then that will affect what the tax cap could be, anywhere from 2.25 on the left to 3.93. These are any capital expenditures that we're going to make in the upcoming year above and beyond what we get aid on. So the easiest way to think about it is school buses. So how much are we potentially going to spend on school buses on top of the transportation aid we get? So anything that we're going to do as a capital expenditure in this year, and that's part of what we'll figure out in the month of March as we go through all the presentations with the board, will impact what this dollar is, and then therefore that will impact where we can set the tax levy limit from a low of about 2.25 to a high of 3.93, with just that little caveat of if we're going to pay forward some interest, and that may come up in the future. But that's what we want to decide as the board. We will remember that how much we choose to go with, whether it's 2.25 or up to 3.93, that is the gift that keeps on giving, because that calculates the factor which becomes the base for the following year. So the lower we go, the lower this number is, and the lower our expenditures would be for next year, because we would have a lower amount. So that's something that we always think about, because in some ways you're leaving that money behind because you're not getting the maximum that you can get. But we also want to be real about the conditions right now in the world. Things are tough. The economy is tough. And, you know, I think that before we had our 3 pillars, we had our 2 pillars, which were academic excellence and fiscal responsibility. And fiscal responsibility is still very important to our community, and I know to this Board of Education. So when we get to the budget vote, we are going to do 2 things. Obviously, we are going to vote on a budget, of course. We're going to vote for the Board of Education. But one thing that we are proposing for the board to consider is that we add a new fund reserve. So right now, you know, we have a capital reserve. So that's money we've put away that we could use for any capital improvement projects. We don't have to raise taxes. We don't have to take out loans. It's money we have. It's just like setting up a bank account, just like you would do at your home. You can also now create something that's called a repair reserve. And what a repair reserve is, any kind of improvement that we need to make or equipment that are not something that recurs annually. So let's say that there is some major roofing issue that happens in one of the buildings, and all of a sudden there's a terrible storm, we have to replace a large part of a roof in the building. You know that's going to come at a pretty serious cost. That's something where we could go in and say, can we use our repair reserve? We have to have voter authorization to say you can set up that reserve. And all it's saying is that we're going to set up that account so that we have that for the future should we need that. That requires budget approval. In 2017, our voters approved the capital project reserve. So this would be a new reserve. And then we're going to ask the voters this year, potentially if the board wants to do so, would they be willing to give us permission to take money out of the capital reserve that already exists to spend on the Bout Hills Elementary School? We need to improve some portions of the building, but we also need to look at the engineering of arrival, dismissal, and we have money in the capital reserve that could cover it. So this would be a proposal that goes on the ballot, and what the taxpayers would be saying is, you can use that money, go ahead and use that money. It's not extra money we're asking from them to pay in taxes, it's not money that we're gonna take out from a loan. They're simply giving us the authorization to go into that savings account, if you will, and spend it for this purpose. So there are two possible proposals for this year's budget vote, in addition to the budget. Okay, questions on that? And if you have in the weeds financial questions, you might want to wait for Mrs. Howard. But I'll be happy to answer.
Did we, or was there additional discussion? I know we had talked a little bit about with the capital reserve proposition, looking at other similar or slightly lesser improvements that could be made to other district properties that would be done as part of the same proposition, basically.
We're going to talk about that at the March 13th workshop. What are some other options? So they're going to be presenting that on March 13th.
So this might not be the
And
proposition.
this may
is
not
still
be the
open for
exact
discussion.
language.
Okay,
Correct, correct.
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so our first meeting has concluded. Again, it is just the overview. Everything that you saw tonight will go into more detail as we have our subsequent budget meetings. Our next one is a week from today, on March 11th, and then we move to the 18th, April 1st, and then the actual budget vote is on May 20th. So much more to come. Good overview, I hope, for the board about some of the things that we're thinking about in terms of education, and then where we stand financially at the beginning of this 25-26 budget season.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did you ask any questions from the audience? There are questions? No, none?
Excellent presentation. Clear. Very good, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Motorola. Actually, I'm going to take a motion to close out the budget and adjourn. Mrs. Motorola, Mr. Cannon, all in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you for coming, and thanks to those who are listening at home. We appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Another year of budget.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to ask you in the middle of the.
Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to do it in the middle